everyone, welcome to this JavaScript crash course video. In this session, we bring to you all the fundamental concepts of JavaScript. But before we begin, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to never miss an update. First, let's have a look at the agenda for the session. First, we'll look at a simple Hello World program using JavaScript. Then, we'll understand the different types of arrays deployed in JavaScript. We'll look at the concept of loops, objects, this keyword and functions in detail. Then we'll learn about form validation, JavaScript regular expressions, and JavaScript email validation. Then we'll move on to more advanced topics like promises and async await. So without further delay, let's begin. In this video, we will learn all about JavaScript and write our first program using this language. So without further ado, let's begin. What's in it for you? Now we'll start by understanding what JavaScript actually is. Then we will get to know why it is so popular these days. And lastly, we'll write our first program in JavaScript which will print Hello World in the browser window. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a dynamic computer programming language which is lightweight and object-oriented. Now the best part about JavaScript is the fact that it's open source and is cross-platform compatible, meaning one piece of code written in any system regardless of the operating system functions the same in other operating systems as well. Lastly, most commonly used as a part of web pages, it allows client-side script to interact with the user and make dynamic pages. Now moving on to the next important question, why JavaScript? Now, being the most popular language in the world, JavaScript has a huge fan base and benefits from a large community support. JavaScript is now being used in many industry fields such as web development, mobile application development, and also game development. It is very diverse in nature. There are great career opportunities for JavaScript developers as this technology seems to be holding on its own when compared to other languages. Alright, now moving on, let's go ahead and execute a simple program to understand JavaScript better. So we'll go ahead and execute a simple Hello World program. Alright, for that, first thing you need is a text editor. In this case, we've used the VS Code editor. So now let's go to our text editor, that is VS Code, and here let's open a file. Here say new file. And now you can type in your code here. So we will have to add the JavaScript to the HTML code and then print out the words Hello World on the browser window. Right? That's our objective. So let's add the HTML boilerplate in this file. So let's type in HTML. This is our tag. And then next we have the body tag. So within the body tag, we can add the script tag to insert the JavaScript into HTML page, right? So we say script language equals JavaScript and type equals text / JavaScript, alright? Let's close the tag. And then in the script, we call a JavaScript function that is document.write, which writes the string to our HTML page. Right? So we say document.write and within braces we say hello world. Okay, and now we close the tags. We also close the body and finally the HTML. Alright. Now when we save the file, we're going to save it, say on my desktop, and I'm going to call it index.html. Right? So make sure the extension is HTML and then save it. Alright, it says it already exists. I say replace it. And now once you save it as an HTML file, you can see that the colors have appeared. So any errors will be easily indicated here. So now let me save this, and now let's go ahead and execute the file that is stored. So let me go back to my desktop, and here I have index.html. There you go. When you click on the file, it opens in your browser and you can see the words hello world. In this, we will be learning all about JavaScript arrays and the popular methods of the array object. So what's in it for you? We'll start by understanding what a JavaScript array is. Then we will get to know about the operations that we are performing on the array. After that, we'll get familiar with some of the most used array methods. And lastly, we'll go through map, reduce, and filter functions. So what exactly is an array? Now an array object lets you store multiple values in a single variable. It stores a fixed size sequential collection of elements of the same type. Now an array is used to store a collection of data and it uses only integers as element indices. However, associative arrays can also use string indices. Moving on, let's understand what array operations are. Now we can perform various operations on an array in JavaScript. But let's start by creating an array. So for that, let's go ahead and create a folder first, which will consist of the file that we're creating, right? So for that, let me just go ahead and create a folder. And I'll call it demo_array. So once you're done with that, open your Visual Studio Code editor and here say open folder and click on demo array. Okay, it's creating the workbench. Alright, and now here you can see the new file icon. So go ahead and create demo.html file. Alright, here you go. Now let's start typing the code. The first thing we do is type in our HTML tag. And here I have the head tag. And let me say JavaScript tutorial. Alright, and now let's create the body tag. Now within the body tag, I create a paragraph tag and create an ID and let me call it demo and then close the tag. Now I'll explain to you why we're doing this a little later. So first let's go ahead and create the script tag. So say script, and within the script let's create our array. So let me use the keyword let and say we give the name of the array cars equals in square braces we say BMW and Volvo and then say Honda. Alright, so now we create an array. Now one more thing is that we use the keyword let so that which indicates that the array can be changed throughout the program. Alright, so now we go ahead and display it. So I say document dot get element by ID, and here I say now the ID created was demo, so I say demo here, and I use the dot inner HTML property which is equal to cars. Okay, let me change this to BMW first. Alright, so what exactly inner HTML does is that it is responsible for what is being displayed on the web page. Okay, now since we've taken ID as demo, any changes made is reflected in this ID and then displayed onto the web browser. Alright, so let's save this and now execute the file. So here I go back to my folder and then to the file and go ahead and click on it. So there you go. The heading is displayed and the entire array is displayed here. Alright, so let's go back to our VS Code. Okay, so I hope this was easy to understand. Now let's go ahead. So the next operation is to access an array element. So let's go back to our VS Code. And here, let's create another variable. Say let BMW. BMW is the name of a variable. Don't get confused with the array element. So BMW equals cars of the index 0. So basically, cars of 0 is nothing but BMW. Alright, so that is being saved in the variable BMW. And now let's just go ahead and display this. So let's just copy this and paste it here, and instead of cars, you use the variable name BMW. That is this one. Alright. So now let's save this, and when we execute it, you see BMW here. That's how you retrieve an element from an array. Next up, we have the array length property, which displays the length of the array. So again, let me show you how to do that. Let's go back to our code. And here, let's create a variable and let's call it length variable. So I say let len equals cars.length. Now you can use the length property, which will retrieve the length of the array for us. It's as simple as that. And now after this, again, let's just copy the same code here and then let's pass len. Okay. Now let's save this, and when you execute it again, it says 3. So we've successfully retrieved the length of the array. Alright, so the next operation is to access the last array element, right? So let's go back to our VS Code, and now let's create another variable and let's call it last, and we'll just say last equals cars, and within square braces cars.length minus 1, right? So basically, the length of the array is 3 and 3 minus 1 is 2. So it should retrieve cars of 2, which is Honda, right? So let's just execute this. Let me pass last here, save it, and see if it displays Honda for us. There you go. It's as simple as that. Alright, so moving on, the next array operation is loop over an array item. So for that, let's go to our code, and here, let's use the for loop. So I say cars dot for each, and within this, we'll say item, comma index, comma array. And now we use the arrow function and display the content on the console. So I say console.log of item along with its index. So let's save this. And now let's go ahead and execute it. Alright, now as you can see, nothing is printed on your web page, right? Because whatever is being printed has to be printed in your console. So now click on F12, which opens the developer options. And here you can see console, so click on that. And now you can see the name of the item in the array along with its index. So you see BMW 0, Volvo 1 and Honda 2. Now that we've learned about the array operations, let's go ahead and learn about the array methods. So the first method is toString. Now as the name suggests, it is used to convert an array into a string. Alright, so let's go back to our VS Code. And now let's copy the same code here. And here, instead of last, I just say cars dot toString. Now you can use this method to convert the array into a string. So let's save this and let's execute it. Alright, now here the same output is shown, which means that the type has only been changed to string type. Alright, moving on. The next method is pop. Now pop basically removes the last element from the array. So let me show you how that works. Let's go back to our VS Code, and here we have to save the popped element into a variable, right? So let's create a variable, say last. Okay, and since last is already used, let me call it last one. Last one of cars.pop. Now you can use the pop method to pop the element. And now we can just copy the same code to display this onto our web page. And here I just say last one. Now, since we've popped the last element, the array has only two elements, right? That is BMW and Volvo. So if you want to display the last element, it should display Volvo, right? So what we can do is we can just create another variable, say last two, and just use the same logic here. Okay, and now let's just display it on your console, and let's say last two. Alright, so now let's save it. Now the popped element has been saved in last one, which is displayed on the web page, and the last element of the array after the pop function has to be displayed on our console. So let's go ahead and execute the file. Alright, so Honda has been displayed. That is the element that has been removed from the array. And now once we check our console, here you go. Here you can see Volvo, which means that is the last element in the array. Moving on, the next method is the push method. Now as the name suggests, it is used to add a new element to the array. And remember, to the end of the array. So let's go back to our VS Code. And here let me say cars dot push. Push is the method that we are using, inside of which we'll say Audi. Alright, and now let's just display the same thing. So let me copy this, and here let me say cars. Okay, so let me save it, and once I execute it, it says BMW, Volvo and Audi. So we've successfully added another element to the end of the array. So the next method is the shift method. Now basically shift is used to remove the first element from the array. Now this method shifts all the elements, reducing the indices of every element by one. Alright, let me show you how this works. So let's go back to our VS Code, and here let me just say cars dot shift. It's as simple as that, and let's just display this. Let me copy the same thing. Let's save it, and when we execute it, here you can see it just displays Volvo and Audi. So now cars has array elements Volvo and Audi with array indices 0 and 1. Alright, so moving on, the next method is unshift. Alright, so to add an element into the beginning of an array, we use the unshift method. Therefore, this method increases the array index by 1. Right? So let's go back to our VS Code and use the same function unshift. So let's say cars.unshift, and here we go, let's save it, and here we have to specify what we're adding, right? Let me say Hyundai. Okay, let's save this, and when we execute it, you can see Hyundai, Volvo and Audi. It's as simple as that. Alright, moving on, the next method is the concat method. Now this is basically used to merge two different arrays, right? So let's go back to our VS Code. And here, let's create another array first. And let's just call the array bikes, okay? And let's create, say, Yamaha. And let's say Suzuki. And then we'll say Royal Enfield, okay? And now, let's save this and say let vehicles, this is another array, which is basically the after concatenation, the entire array is saved into this array, alright? So let's say cars.concat of bikes. We just concat bikes and cars together. Okay, and then let's just display this over the web page. So let me change this to vehicles. Alright, let me save this. So let's go ahead and execute it. There you go. Now both the arrays have been merged together into a single array. So the next array method is the sort method. Now basically sort is used to sort the entire array into ascending order. Alright, so let's go back to our editor. And here, let's just use the sort method on the array vehicles. Alright, vehicles.sort. Okay, and let's just display this on our web page. So again, let's go back and execute it, and here you can see it has been sorted. The next method is the reverse method. So the reverse method is again used to reverse the elements in an array. So it's logic, right? So sort was used to sort it in ascending order. Now when you reverse it, it just sorts it in the descending order. So let's go back here. I want to copy the same thing. Alright, and here instead of sort, let me just say reverse. So let's save this and execute it. There we go. It has displayed the entire array in the reverse order. Alright. With that, we finished the array methods. Next up, we have map, reduce, and filter. First up, we have array.map. Now the map method is used for creating a new array from an existing one by applying a function to each and every one of the elements in the first array. And it does not change the original array. Alright, so to make you understand this better, let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. And now here, let's first create another array. Okay, so let me call this num1 and let's have integers, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Okay, and now let's have another array num2. So let's go ahead and say num1 dot map of, let me define a function, say multiply. Okay, so multiply is the function that I'm going to define here. So let's say function multiply of value. Okay, and inside this, let me say return value into 2. Okay, so what this basically does is that it multiplies each and every element of the array num1 by 2 and saves the new elements into the array num2. Okay, Now after this, let's go ahead and display the content. So let me copy this. And let's display the content in the array num2, right? So let me save it. Let's go back here, execute it. So there we go. Every element has been multiplied by 2 and then displayed again. I hope this was clear for you. Now the next method is the filter method. So the filter method takes each element in an array and applies a conditional statement against it. And if this condition returns true, the element gets pushed onto the output array. But if it returns false, the element does not get pushed. Alright, so let me show it to you. Now, let's go ahead and create another variable, say num3. And here I say num1 dot filter of say comp. Now comp is a function. Let me define the function here. Let me say function comp of value, takes a value as a parameter, within which I'm going to check if the value is greater than 4. Now it only appends the element into the array num3 if the value is greater than 4. Alright, so now let me just go ahead and change this to num3. Alright, let's save this. And when we go back and execute, here we go. Now the values, so let's go back here, let me check. Now num1 had the values 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, right? So according to this, it has to only display 5, 6 and 7. Do not get confused with num2 here. We've passed num1 here, so it checks for this array, right? So according to the logic, it should display 5, 6 and 7, and it has done so here. Okay. Moving on. The next method is the reduce method. Now the reduce method reduces an array of values down to just one single value. Now to get the output value, it runs a reducer function to each element of that array. Okay, now this method does not reduce the original array again. So let's go back to our VS Code. Now let me create another variable, say num4, and say num1 dot reduce, and let me call it sum. So what we're basically doing is that we're adding all the digits 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 in num1 to a single value, right? That is the sum, and then we're going to be displaying that. So what we're going to do is let's define the function here. Function sum basically is total comma value, right? And then here let's say return total plus the value. Okay, and after this I'm going to display the content. So let's say num4. Okay, let's save it, go back and execute. Here we go. It displays the sum of the entire values in the array. We're learning all about JavaScript loops. If you're new to JavaScript, I suggest you go through our previous videos on this topic. So without further ado, let's begin and look at what's in store for you. So we're going to be covering topics like for loop, while loop, which also includes the do while loop, and then we're going to learn about breaking out of a loop, and then we'll see how to skip a loop cycle. Now before jumping into the for loop, let's first understand what exactly a loop is, right? So a loop is basically a programming construct that executes a piece of code as long as a certain condition is met. Alright, and there are two different types of loops. We have entry control loops and exit control loops. Now, what exactly are entry control loops? Now, these are the loops where the test condition is checked before executing the piece of code. For example, you have the for loop and the while loop. So in their case, before entering the loop, the condition is checked, and only if the condition is met, it enters the loop and executes the code. Alright, when it comes to exit control loops, the test condition is checked after the loop has been executed. Alright, so in this case, the loop at least gets executed, the code in the loop gets executed at least once. So the example for this is the do while loop. Alright, with this basic knowledge, let's go ahead and learn about the different loops. So the first loop is the for loop. Alright, so what exactly is a for loop? This is the basic logic and the flowchart in front of you. So what exactly happens is that, say for example, you want to print the word looping, say 10 times, right? So what you can do is you can start and you can have a for loop which goes from 0 to 9. And then you increase the number by 1 every time you print the loop. Once it's equal to 10 or even greater than 10, it ends the loop, right? So let me help you understand this better with an example. So let's go to our editor, that is VS Code. Here I've created a folder called demo_loops, within which I've created a file called for loops. Alright, so now let's just write down our initial code for HTML, that is HTML, and then I have a head tag within which I say JavaScript loops. Alright, now I have a body tag within which I give a heading for clearer understanding. Let me have a heading, say JavaScript for loops. Alright, let me just call it for loop. Now let's have the script tag within which I'll have a variable, say x, and now we'll have the for loop. So we say for x equals 0, x less than 5, x plus plus, within which I say console.log of x. So basically what happens is, now you have the first variable which is called the counter variable. Now this keeps track of how many times the code is being executed, right? And next, I less than 5 is the condition. Now the loop keeps executing as long as the condition is met. And lastly, the counter variable is incremented, and usually it's incremented by 1, right? So here we've done the same thing. And inside the loop, we print the value of x. Alright, so let me save the file and then execute it. Alright, it's printed JavaScript loops here. Let me just go back. Okay, my bad. I missed out on the title tag. So this has to be enclosed within the title tag. So let me just change it here. Now let's save this. Let's go back and just refresh the page. And that is it. So whatever is in the title tag basically appears here. Alright. So now since we're printing the value of x on our console, we'll have to inspect our element. So let's go here. And here let's check on console. And here you can see all the values have been printed from 0 to 4. Alright, now this is a simple for loop. So next up is a while loop. Now the logic is similar to that of a for loop. So first the condition is checked, and if the condition holds true, then the code is executed, and if it is false, it terminates. Alright, so moving on, let's understand the general syntax. So here first you have the variable whose value keeps changing, and then you have the ending condition, which is basically the maximum value a variable can reach. Alright, so let's go back to our VS Code. And here, for better understanding, let me just change this to JavaScript while loop. Alright, let's just delete this, and here let's initialize the value of x to 1. And now I say while x less than or equal to 5, within braces I say console.log of x, and then I increment the value of x. Alright, so let me save this and let's execute the file. Alright, so it says JavaScript while loop, and let's inspect. And here in our console, it displays the values of x. Alright, so according to the logic, x is initially initialized to 1, and the value gets executed once it enters the while loop. Alright, it's incremented and then checked every time until the value reaches 6, right? And then it breaks from the loop since the value does not hold true, and then it terminates. So this is the logic behind the while loop. Next up is the do while loop. Now here, as you can see, first the code is executed and then the condition is checked. If the condition is true, then the code execution continues, and if it falls, it's terminated. Alright, so this is an exit control loop. Also, in an exit control loop, the code is executed at least once. So let's go back to our VS Code, and here, let me just delete this. Now let's initialize x to say 15, alright? And now I use the do keyword within which I write the code. So first I'm going to print the value of x, console.log of x, and then I increase my value. And here I mention my test condition, which is while x less than say 10. Alright, so according to the logic, initially the value is x, and once it enters the loop here, it should print the value of x, which is 15. Alright, and then it increments the value. But once it comes out of the loop, it checks for the condition. Here the condition says less than 10, but since x is not less than 10, it prints the value x, that is 15, and then terminates. Alright, so let's save this and execute it. So let me execute this, and here let's check the console. So there we go, it prints 15. So what it does is that it prints the value 15 first and then checks the condition. Now let's go ahead and change the value of x to say 5. Alright, so now it enters the loop and then it prints the value of x and then increments it. And when it comes out of the loop and checks the condition, as long as the value of x remains less than 10, it prints it. Okay, so let's save this, go back here, and let's refresh the page. And here you can see the values 5 to 9 are printed. So this is how the do while loop works. Moving on to the next concept, breaking out of a loop. Now, as the name suggests, break is the keyword that is used to break out of a loop. Now here is a simple code for you. So according to the logic, it prints the values between 1 to 10. And say at the value 5, you want to break out of the loop. You can simply use the keyword break. So let's go back to our VS Code. And here, let me just make it simple and say for x equals 1, x less than or equal to 10. Let's increment it. And within the loop, let's display the value x. on the console, and then we're going to check for the condition if x equals 5. Alright, so if x equals 5, we break out of the loop. So let's save the file and execute it. And there you go. It's displayed the values from 1 to 5. So basically the code inside the for loop is executed, and once the value of x reaches 5, it breaks from the loop. Simple, right? Alright, so let's move on. Next up, we have skipping a loop cycle. Alright, so here, what exactly we do is we make use of a keyword continue to skip a particular loop cycle. Say in this case, we have a for loop which displays the values of I ranging from 1 to 10. However, we want to skip the cycle when it reaches the value 3. So what we do is we make use of the keyword continue here. So basically it displays 1 and 2 and skips the third cycle and then directly displays 4. Alright, so let me show you in our VS Code editor. Here, let me just remove this and say if x equals 5, I'm going to continue. Alright, after which I'm going to say console.log of x. So let me save this and then execute it. So here, let me refresh the page, and there we go. As you can see, it displays 1, 2, 3 and 4, and the fifth cycle is skipped. Alright, and the rest of the digits are displayed. So that is how you can skip a loop. I highly suggest you also practice all of this and then play around with loops to get a better understanding. So taking a step forward, we're going to learn about JavaScript objects. So without further ado, let's begin and look at what's in store for us. First, we'll start by understanding what a JavaScript object is. Then, we'll learn how to create a JavaScript object and also get to know about the properties of these objects. After that, we'll get familiar with using JavaScript methods. Lastly, we'll understand what JavaScript accessors are. So what is a JavaScript object? JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language, so everything in Java is an object. A JavaScript object is like a real-world entity having state and behavior, for example, a car. Now we can take a car as an object. It will have its state like color and model. It will also have behaviors like accelerate and brake. JavaScript is template-based and we can create objects without having the need to create a class. Generally, object is accompanied by a class that defines an object's blueprints, but JavaScript doesn't require any class to be defined for objects. Moving on to the next concept, to create a JavaScript object. Now basically there are 3 different ways of creating a JavaScript object. Alright, so we'll look at them one by one. The first one is to use a literal to create and define a JavaScript object. So let's go to our VS Code editor. Now if you have any doubts regarding the initial setup, then I suggest you go through the previous video, that is JavaScript arrays, to get you started with it. So here I've created a folder called demo objects, and now I'm going to create a file called create_objects.html. Alright, so we'll begin by writing the initial code, that is the head and the body. So I say HTML, within this I create the head tag, and then I create a title tag, and let's say JavaScript objects. Then after the head tag, I'm going to create a body tag. And let's create a heading and say creating JavaScript objects. Okay, and now we create an ID. All of this is explained in the previous video. I really suggest you go through the video beforehand so that you get a clear picture. And then I say ID equals, say demo, and then I'm going to close it. Now the first method that we're going to use to create an object is by using object literals, right? So what we can do is say script within which I declare a variable, say var student. Now within the object, we're going to create 3 different properties. Now this is basically like a dictionary. It has a property, a key, and then a value. Okay, so I say name property, and let's say Chris, and then another property, say age, and say 21, and another property, say studies, and say maybe computer science. Okay, so this is the syntax used to create an object using an object literary. Now after this, what we're going to do is we're going to display this, right? Now we want to display the message saying Chris of age 21 studies computer science. So what we can do is say document.getElementById, and the ID that we're going to pass is demo, and we say inner HTML equals student.name, which is Chris, after which we display the message of the age, and then the age, that is student.age, studies, student.studies. Okay, let's save this, and when we execute the file, it says Chris of the age 21 studies computer science. Alright, this is one of the ways in which you can define an object. Alright, so moving on to the next way of creating a JavaScript object, it is to use the new keyword. Now this is the most traditional way of creating an object, right? So let's go back to our VS Code. Let's create another script within which we say var student equals new object. I'm sure everybody has learned the same way, the same syntax. So this is one of the ways. After which we can say student.name equals Chris. Again, student.age equals 21, and then student.studies equals computer science. Alright, now after this we again display the message. So let me just copy this. Alright, so let's save this and run our code again. And there we go. It displays the message Chris of the age 21 studies computer science. Alright, this was the second method used to create an object. Alright, so then moving on to the third method, it is to use an object constructor to create and define a JavaScript object. So let's go back to our code editor, and here we define a function. So we say function, say stud, with 3 parameters, that is name, age, and say studies. Okay, and now within the function we use the keyword this. So we say this.name equals name. Alright, and we say this.age equals age. And we say this.studies equals studies. Now what we do is that we can create a variable and pass parameters to the function. So we say var student equals stud, and within braces we say Chris, comma 21, comma computer science. Alright, so we've done passing the parameters. After this, we're going to copy the same print message here. Alright, so let's save this and execute our file. So let's refresh the web page. And there we go. It still displays the message, Chris of the age 21, studies computer science. So this was the third method that can be used to create objects. Moving on to the next topic, object properties. Now a JavaScript object is basically a collection of unordered properties, right? Values associated with the JavaScript object are called its properties. And properties can usually be added, updated, or deleted, excluding read-only properties. So now let's have a look at the demo to help you understand this better. So let me go back to my VS Code. So this was where we left off, and this was how we created objects, right? So now let me create another file, and let me call it objects_properties.html. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the first piece of code here. Alright, let me just copy this into my new file. And here, as you can see, student is the object that we've created, and name, age, and studies are the 3 properties. Now say we want to update the age. Alright, so what we can do is here we can just say student.age equals, let me change it to 24. Alright, and let me save this, and when we execute the file, that was object_properties, you can see Chris of the age 24. So 21 is updated to 24. So this is one of the ways you can do it. Or there's another method. You can just assign the property to a variable and then display the variable instead. So what we can do is we can just assign student.age to a property, say x. And here, instead of displaying student.age, we can just say x. Alright, so let's save this. And when we run it, it says 21 because we haven't updated 21 to 24 anywhere. Alright, so 21 remains the same. So another method we can use is we can just say x equals age. So we're directly assigning the property to the variable. And here, when I'm displaying it, I say student of x. Alright, so let me save this. And when you look at the web page, it still displays the same thing. These are different ways of accessing the properties. You can update them, delete them, unless they're read-only. Alright, so let's move on to the next concept, object methods. Now basically, a JavaScript method is an action that can be performed on the objects. So you'll understand better with the help of the demo. So let's go back to our VS Code. And here I've created another HTML file called objects_methods. Alright, so let me just copy the initial code, paste it here, and let's have the enclosing tags as well. And HTML. Alright. Now here I declare another tag, that is the button tag. So we're going to be making this a button here. So I say button ID equals click me. So that is the action that I'm going to be performing. And the message that is going to be displayed on the button will be click me. Alright. So we're going to see the usage of it a little later. Now let's go ahead and create an object. So I say script, within which I create the user object. So we're creating using a object literal here, and I declare the property name as Chris again, and age say 24. Okay. So let's close this. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new function that we will use as an object method. Alright, so I say function, and let's give the name say hi. Okay. Within the function we basically display a message. So we're going to say alert and hello. Alright, so this is going to be displayed in a separate dialog box. So now once the declaration is done, what we're going to do is we're going to create another property, basically say user dot, let's say message, and assign say hi to it. So basically what we're doing is we're adding the previously created method to a new property, that is user.message, the message property. Alright. So now I say document.getElement by ID, and say demo, and the message that I want is just hi plus the username. Alright. So what we're going to do is we're going to display the message hello, alright, when the user clicks on the button. So for that, let's just copy this. And here, instead of demo, right, we're going to be passing the ID click me as per this, and the event is going to be on click event. So here I say on click, after which I'm going to simply pass user.message. Let me just delete this. Alright, so here I notice that I've given an equal to sign. I'm sorry, it's a colon. Alright, so let's save the file and let's go ahead and execute it. Alright, so here you can see hi Chris being displayed, and once we click on the button, you can see an alert which says hello. Alright. So now let's move on to the next concept, that is Java object accessors. Now getters and setters allow defining an object accessor. Alright, to get the value of a property in a JavaScript object, we use a getter, and to set the value of a property of a JavaScript object, we use a setter. So let's go back to our demo, and now let me create another file, and let's call it object accessors. And now again, let me just copy the first initial part. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create a new object. So let me say script, within which I say var, and let's call it car. Alright, so let me define the properties, say model, and the model is say BMW 320D, and another property say color, and let's say it's navy blue, and the last property say fuel type, and let's say it's diesel. Now what we can do is we can make use of the keyword get to access the properties. So I say get and say fuel, within which I return this dot fuel type. Alright, it's as simple as that. So now let's display it. Document dot get element by ID, demo dot inner HTML equals, we say car dot fuel. Alright, so now let's save it and execute our file. Here you go, it retrieves diesel for us. Now this is one of the ways of accessing the properties. Now to help you understand setter, let's go ahead and create another object. Alright, say var car again. Now let's say the model is Audi A4, color be bright red, and fuel type, let's keep it blank. Alright. Now to set the value, we use the set keyword. We say set fuel, and the parameter is fuel, within which we say this dot fuel type equals fuel, right? Now let's set the value for the fuel. Say car dot fuel equals petrol. Alright. Now let's display the same. Let me copy this. And what we want to display is the fuel type, right? So here we say fuel type. So let's save this. And let's go ahead and execute the file. And there we go. It retrieves petrol. So what it does is basically it assigns the value petrol to the property fuel type, and then we display the same on our web page. So this is how you make use of getters and setters. We're going to be learning all about JavaScript, this keyword. So without further delay, let's jump right in. So you must have heard about this keyword several times. So in JavaScript, this keyword basically refers to an object which is executing the current piece of code. Well, in simple terms, this keyword basically just references the object that is executing the current function. Now, if the function that is being referenced is a regular function, then this keyword references the global object. Alright, I'm sure it must be a little tricky at the moment, but please hold on. And if the function that is being referenced is a method in an object, then this keyword references the object itself. So to help you understand the concept better and to clarify all your doubts, let's look at a simple demo. So here in VS Code, I've created a file called this.html. Alright, you can give it a name of your choice. Now here, let me first define a variable, and let's call the variable say value, and let's set it to say 50. Alright. Now let's go ahead and create a simple function. So let me say function, my function. Alright. And within this, let me define the value for value. Let me set the value for the variable value as 100. Okay. And now let me just alert it. Alright. So let me say alert value, okay, plus value. And then let me have another alert message, which is going to display this dot value. So let me just say this value, and instead of just saying value, I say this dot value. Alright. Now after this, let's go ahead and call the function, my function. So let me just save this and execute it. So here it says value equals 100. And then when you see this dot value, it says 50. So now here you can come back to the code and see. Now when I just say value, it takes the value 100, alright, which is taken locally. But when I say this dot value, since it is a normal function, it references to the global variable, which is here, this value. I hope this makes sense to you now. Now moving on, let's look at the behavior of the this keyword within an object method. So let me create an object here. But before that, let me just comment this out. Let's say script. And now let's create an object. So let's say const. And then I give the name of my object as random. And within this, let me say name and let's call it John. And then I create a method called info. Okay. And within this, I display a console message that says, hi, my name is. And now I make use of the this keyword. I say this dot name. Alright. And now let me just go ahead and call this method. So I say random dot info. Alright, so let's save this and execute it. So let me check my console. And there you go. It says, hi, my name is John. So if you clearly observe here, when we say this dot name, since it is being used within a method that is defined inside an object, it references to this property here. Alright. Unlike this case where it references to the global variable that was mentioned outside. So I hope this helped you understand the difference between the two. Now let's look at another simple example. So now let me just change the value of name here to say tutorial. And now let's define another property which is basically an array. So let me just call the property video, within which I have an array, let's say JavaScript, another value, say this, and then let's say keyword. And in my info method, I'm going to just display these video tags. So let me just say this. Okay, let me just delete this first. And let's say this dot video. Now since it's an array, we can make use of for each. And now for each in turn takes a callback function. And then I say, I'm going to call it a tag, the parameter that's being passed, within which I just console log it and say tag. Alright, so let me save it and then execute this. Now here you can see that the values in the video property are displayed. That is JavaScript, this, and keyword. Now let's suppose that you want to display the name along with every string here, right? So naturally you would go ahead and just say this dot name, right? It makes perfect sense. So let me just save and execute this. Now if you see, just the values of the property video are displayed here. Now the main reason for this is, if you closely observe, that this function here is mentioned within the callback function, right? So when it is referencing to the global object, which is unclear, which is undefined in this case. So to overcome this, what we can do is that the for each method takes in two properties. One is the function, the other one is the object. So here we just pass this. Alright, so what happens is, it's going to reference the current object, that is random. So let me save this and then execute it. And there you go. You can see that tutorial, that is the name, has been displayed. Alright, I hope you understood the concept of the this keyword. It could be a little tricky, but as you work on it, you'll get the hang of it. We're going to learn all about JavaScript functions. In our previous videos, we've covered topics like JavaScript arrays and loops. If you're new to this topic, I suggest you go through these topics before. Alright, so before jumping in, let's go ahead and look at what's in store for us. First, we're going to learn what exactly JavaScript functions are. Then we'll look at JavaScript function expressions, then the function constructor, self-invoking functions, functions as values, functions as objects, arrow functions, generator function, and the predefined functions. What are JavaScript functions? So basically, a function is a group of reusable code which can be called from anywhere in your program, right? When you have a piece of code that you want to execute repeatedly in your entire program, it makes more sense to define it once and call it over and over, right? It makes the code more efficient and readable. This also helps programmers write modular codes. So this is the syntax. You make use of the function keyword, followed by which you mention the name of the function. The name of the function is completely your choice. Next, you mention the parameter list. And within curly braces, you can define the function. Now the function body is basically the code that is executed every time the function is called. So let's go to our VS Code editor. And here I've created a folder called demo functions, within which I've created an HTML file called functions.html. Alright, and now I've just typed in the initial code. Now let's create a function. So let me say script, within which I use the keyword, that is function keyword. And now I give the name for my function. I say my underscore function, and the function takes a parameter, say value. Now this function basically returns the square of the digit, alright? So within which I say document.getElementById. The ID is demo. And now it just displays value into value. Alright, so the function basically displays the square of the number. Now outside the function, let me call the function, it is my function, and let me pass the value 5. Alright, now let's save this and execute it. So let me go back to my file. And here we go. It displays the value 25. So this was a simple function which took a value, a digit as a parameter, and then returned the square. Moving on to the next concept, function expression. Now what we learned previously was function declaration, but a function can also be defined as an expression. Now this is what the syntax looks like. Now here the function is created and assigned to the variable explicitly like any other value. The meaning remains the same. That is, you create the function and store the value that it returns into a variable, and in our case it's x. right? So let's go to our VS Code and let me help you understand this better. So now I create another function, and here I say let x equals, let's use a simpler function. So I just mention function, and within curly braces I display an alert message, and I display a message saying hello. Alright. Now after that, to display the message, what we can do is, let me just copy this, our output code, and we paste it here. And here what we're going to be displaying is the value x, right? Now since it consists of a function, you'll have to type the curly braces. Now this is crucial for its execution. Alright, so let me save this and then execute. Let me execute this. And here you go. It says, the site says hello. So we've successfully executed the piece of code. We can also assign this variable x to another variable and then call that variable instead. Right? We can say let y equals x, and instead of calling x here, we can simply call y. Let me save it and then let me refresh the page. And there we go. It still displays the message hello. Alright, so this is one of the ways of defining a function, that is as an expression. Moving on to our next concept, function constructor. Now JavaScript functions are defined using the keyword function, right? Now functions can also be defined using a JavaScript built-in function. Now this is the basic syntax. So here we've created a function called myFunction, and we've used the keyword new. After which we've used the constructor function, and inside we provide the parameter list. After that, the return value. Next, you can call the function here, right? So let me just go back to my VS Code. And now let me just make changes to the same piece of code here. I create a function, say my_function. Okay. Alright, let me just change the name to my function. Alright, and then here I use the keyword new and the function constructor, that is function, within which I'm passing all the parameters. So I have a, b, and I'm going to return the sum of the digits. Alright, and now while calling the function, let me just store the value in a variable, say x, and let's call the function, that is my function, with the parameters 2 and 3. Alright, and now let me display it. So I'm just going to copy this, and I want to display the value of x, right? Alright, so let me save this and execute it. If you refresh the page, it displays the sum, that is 5. To make it more readable, let me just display another message here. Let me just say the sum is x. Alright, let me save it and then refresh the page. It says the sum is 5. Alright, now this is how you make use of the function constructor. Next up, we learn about self-invoking functions. Now, as the name suggests, these functions are invoked automatically without being called. Now, previously when we learned about function expressions, we saw that parentheses were crucial. So you have to add parentheses around the function to indicate that it is a function expression. So here is a syntax for you. So what we've done is we've made sure we've enclosed the entire function within parentheses. So let me help you with that. Let's go back to our VS Code and let me create another script. And here, let me create the function within the parentheses and say function. It's not taking any parameters. Instead, it is going to alert a message. So let me say hello, welcome. Alright. After which, we're going to call the function. So again, we have to mention the parentheses. Let's save this and execute. So when we refresh the page, it says, hello, welcome. So we never called the function, rather it got invoked by itself. So these are self-invoking functions. Now let's go ahead and look at functions as values. Now in JavaScript, a function is basically a value. So we can deal with it as a value. Now here is a simple syntax. Now if you closely look at the syntax, you might think that this is same as function expressions. Well, no. In this case, what we do is we first define the function and then we assign it to a particular variable. But in the case of expressions, the function definition was defined during the initialization of the variable, right? And also we had to specify the parenthesis in order to call the function. So to help you understand this better, let me go back to our VS Code. And here, let me just erase this. And let's define a function that returns the product of two digits. So let me just call it product, which takes two parameters, let me say A and B, within which we return the value A into B. Alright, now after this, let's create another variable, say Y equals function, the name of the function is product. So product of 2 and 5. Alright, so this basically returns us 10. Right, so let me just copy this to display this on our web page. And here I change the message to the product. And here let me change it to Y. So let's save this and execute it. So let me refresh the page and here you go. You can see the message, the product is 10. Now what we can do is we can make alterations to this. Now say I want to multiply the value with 5 again, right? So basically this returns 10 and that value is multiplied by 5. So let me save this and refresh our page and there we go. It returns and there we go. It displays 50. So this is how you can make use of functions as values. Moving on to the next topic, functions as objects. Now JavaScript functions are a special type of objects called function objects. Now a function includes a string which holds the actual code, that is the function body of the function. The code is literally just a string. Although not recommended, you can also create a function with the help of the function constructor. I will show that to you a little later on. But for now, let's look at the syntax. Now here we have a variable called body, which basically consists of the function body. It's enclosed in double quotes. And that's a mistake, please ignore it. Alright, so next we have variable function name. So here we create a function using the keyword new and then we pass a parameter list and the body basically tells us what the function returns. Alright, next we have an alert message to call the function. So let me just show how this is executed. Back in our VS Code, let me create another function. And let's say the function returns the area of a circle, right? So let me just create a body variable which returns. So the area of a circle is pi r square. So we make use of math.pi into radius, right? So it's basically pi r square. After which, let's say where circle, and here let's create a function using the new keyword function, and then here we pass the value, that is the radius, and then the body, right? So basically this is the definition of our function. So let's use alert to display the area. So we say alert of circle of 5. Alright, so let me save this and execute it. So when you refresh the page, it displays the area of the circle. So this is how you can use functions as objects. Moving on to our next concept, arrow functions. Now, functions can be written more compactly and more precisely with the help of arrow functions. Alright, now arrow function expressions are ill-suited as methods and they cannot be used as constructors. Now, also while using arrow functions, using const is a safer option because a function expression is always a constant value. So this is the syntax. Now you can only omit the return keyword within the curly braces if the function is a single statement. So this is the syntax. First you provide the name of the function with an equal to sign followed by the argument list. And later you make use of this arrow icon and define the expression. So this is basically nothing but this. So let's go back to our VS Code and check for ourselves. So let's create another function. And here let me say const myfunc equals. Now say we want to display the product of 3 digits. So let me just pass A, B, C as my parameters. And we make use of this icon which indicates that this is an arrow function within which I say return A into B into C. Alright. Now let me just assign this to a variable. Okay, let me say product because we've used X here. And then let me call my function that is myfunc and pass the value 2, 3 and say 4. Alright, so let's display the product. So let me just copy this code. And here let me say the product of the 3 digits is. And let me say product here because that is what is being used here, right? Alright, so let me save this and execute it. Alright, first it displays the area of the circle. Alright, and then we say OK. And there we go. It displays the message, the product of the 3 digits is 24. So let me do one thing. Let me just comment this out. Okay. Let me save it and then execute it again. It just displays this. Alright, so this is how we can make use of arrow functions. Moving on, let's look at the generator function. Now, regular functions typically return only one value, right? Or a single value, or sometimes even nothing. But a generator function can return multiple values. And the speciality is that it can do it so on demand. Alright, now to create a generator function, we make use of an asterisk. So an asterisk indicates that the function is a generator function. So here you can see that we have a function followed by asterisk and we've created a function called generator sequence. So here you can see we have the asterisk after the keyword function followed by the name of the function, right? But the main method of a generator function is the next method. When this method is called, it basically runs the execution until the nearest yield value, alright, or the nearest yield statement. Then the function execution pauses and the yielded value is returned to the outer code. Alright, so the result of the next method is always an object with 2 properties. It has the value property, which is basically the yielded value, and then it has the done property, which displays true if the function code is finished or false if it's otherwise. So let me show its execution for a clearer understanding. So let's go back to our VS Code. And here let's create the generator function. Let's say function asterisk generate function, alright. Now within which I make use of the keyword yield and I say yield 1 first followed by yield 2 and then finally I make use of return which indicates the termination, so I say return 3. Alright. Now we make use of a variable, say generator, and assign it to the generator function. That is generate func. And now I create another variable, say 1, which will basically return the value when I call the next function. So here I say generator dot next. Okay, so whatever generator dot next returns, it's stored in 1. So to display the message, I say alert. And now I'm going to make use of a method called JSON.stringify. Alright, so basically this method converts a JavaScript object or a value to a JSON string. Alright, so within which I'm going to say 1. That is this. Alright, so now let me save this and execute it. Let me refresh the page, and there you go. Here it returns two properties, that is value and done. It says value is 1 and done is false, right? It is false because we haven't reached the return statement yet. So what we can do is to display the rest, let me just copy these and display it one by one. See that, let's do this. And here let me say 2 and this is 3. Let me copy this. Okay, here I say 2 and then I say 3. Alright, so let me save this and then execute it. So when I refresh the page, it says 1 and false. After which again it says 2 and false. And finally when it displays 3, it returns true for the done property. That means we've reached the end of the function definition. So this is how you make use of a generator function. Now let's move on to our last topic, that is predefined functions. Now JavaScript has many built-in functions, alright? Now here are a few of them. We have eval, parseInt, parseFloat, escape and unescape. Now let's go through one by one. Alright, first up is eval. Now this basically evaluates a string and returns a value. Alright, so to help you understand this better, let me go back to our VS Code. And now let me just create another file and let me call it predefined functions.html. Alright, and I've just copied the initial code. Alright, so for eval, the syntax is eval, within which I say expression. Alright, now this is the general syntax. So what this eval does is that it evaluates the expression. And if the result is not a string, the result is just returned. And if the result is a string, it is taken to be a JavaScript program and evaluated. So let me show you how it's done. So first, let's create 3 variables. Alright, let's call them x and initialize it to 5. Then y with 6. And then let z be 7. Alright. Now let's just display the result on the console. So say console.log eval of, let me say, x plus y. Alright. After which I again say console.log of eval of z. Here, since the expression is a string, this gets evaluated. And here, since it's not a string, it just returns the value z. And here, since it is not a string, it just returns the value of z. So let me save this and then execute it. Alright, so let me just check our console. There you go. It evaluated the expression and added the two values, that is x and y, and returned 11, while z is returned as it is. Alright, this is what eval does. Next up is parseInt. Now, as the name suggests, it parses a string argument and returns an integer of the specified radix or base. And the syntax basically includes the keyword parse and the string within parentheses. Parsefloat, on the other hand, parses a string argument and returns a floating point number. Again, the syntax has the keyword parsefloat along with the string within parentheses. Next up is escape. Now, this returns the hexadecimal encoding of an argument. And on the other hand, unescape returns the ASCII string for the specified value. We're going to learn all about JavaScript form validation. So what exactly is form validation? Now, I'm sure you must have filled several online forms, right? A simple example would be a new registration for a website. Now, every time you miss out on giving a particular detail or end up giving faulty information, the website alerts you. So this process of ensuring that the information provided is legit is called form validation. Now, this generally happens on the server side. However, JavaScript facilitates form validation on the client computer before sending it over to the server. Now, there are two functions performed. One is the basic validation, which ensures that all the mandatory fields are filled. Now, this is implemented with the help of a simple loop. And the other is a data format validation. Now, this checks the data for its correctness. So, to help you understand form validation better, let's look at a simple demo. Alright, so back in my Visual Studio Code, I've created a file called forms. Alright, it's an HTML file and I've typed down the initial code. Now, the simple use case that I'm going to show will include the validation of the email and the password fields in a form. Alright, so for that, let's go ahead and first create a simple form. So here, HTML allows the form tag. So I say form, within which I'm going to provide our fields. So I say input, and then the name I'm going to be providing is email. Alright, and then I'll provide a placeholder and call it email. And then the type of the input is going to be text. Alright, and then let me just give a break tag here. So now let me just copy the same thing for my password as well. So here you go, I say password here. And then the placeholder again will be password. And then I'm going to keep the type as text. And finally, I'm going to have a button, a submit button, right? So let me say button, type is basically submit, all right? And let me display submit on my button, all right? Okay, so with the help of this, we've created a simple form. So let me show you how this looks. So here we go. We've successfully created an email field, a password field, and a submit button. And every time I click on the submit button, you can see that my page is getting refreshed. Now, once the user provides the correct email ID and password, we want to display a message. Alright, so for that, I've created another file called message.html, and this is a simple file where I'm displaying the message, hello there, welcome. Alright, so this is a simple message that I want to display. So for that, I have to add it in my form tag. Now, once the form gets submitted, an action has to be performed. And the action is to navigate to the message.html file, right? So let me just say action equals message.html. Now you can also provide a name to your form. So let me call it my form. Alright. So let me just save this. Alright, so moving on, we have to now validate the information that is provided. For that, I'm going to create a function here. So let me call the function validate. Alright, so here I'm going to check for my fields, right? Now, if the email field is empty, then I'm going to alert the user saying please enter the email. And if the password field is empty, I'm going to again alert the user to provide the password. So for that, we're going to make use of this simple if-else logic. So let me say if document dot myform dot email dot value is null. So I'm going to check if the value provided on my email field in my form is null. Alright. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say alert, please provide your email ID. Okay. And then I'm going to say document.myform.email.focus. Now what exactly focus does is that it makes sure that the cursor remains at the email field. That is, it is focused at the same field. Alright. So let me just copy the same thing for my password field. So let me say else if. Let me just copy this. Instead of email, I say password, within which I'm going to alert the user to provide the password. I'll say please provide your password. Alright. So basically it first checks for the email field and then for the password field. So let me just say finally else do nothing. Alright. Okay. So now what we're going to do is every time we click on the submit button, the form gets submitted. Correct? Now we can control when the form is getting submitted. So basically the form gets submitted when this function is executed. So for that, we can use another property here called onSubmit. And here I'm going to call my function, that is validate. So let me say validate here. Alright. So let me save this and let's check the output. So here, as you can see, let me just try submitting it without providing the email field. Alright. So here we go, it alerts us. Alright. And once I click on OK, it still displays the message, hello there, welcome. Now that is not what we want, right? So once the email field is empty, it should remain in the same page and the form shouldn't get submitted. But here in our case, it is getting submitted. So for that, we're going to have to make use of return values. So what happens is, if my email field is empty, then I'm going to return a false. So here I say return false and here as well. And finally, when both my email and my password fields are filled, I'm going to return true. Alright. And same goes here. Let me just say return validate instead of just validate. Right. So here we go. Let me save this and now let's check the output. So here let's first submit the form without providing any information. Alright, so it says please provide your email ID. When I click on OK, observe that the cursor remains at the email field. So here let me just give some random value and then let's try submitting it again without providing the password. And then it says please provide your password. Alright. Okay, now if you observe that the cursor remains at the email field. So let me just check my code once. Here we go. I haven't mentioned password here. So let me change email to password. So let me just provide some random value at my email field and say submit. And then I get a message saying please provide your password. And now you can see that the cursor is at the password field, right? So let me just give random information there. And then I say submit. And here we go. The message "Hello there, welcome" is displayed. So this was a simple demo on form validation. So I really suggest you pause the video here and then go through the code once. We're going to learn all about JavaScript regular expressions. So now, without further delay, let's begin. So what exactly are regular expressions? Now, a regular expression is basically a sequence of characters. Now, these characters could be digits or the letters of the alphabet. And this expression usually searches for a particular pattern. Now, the user can basically define what has to be searched in a text, alright? And these expressions could be alphabet or digits, as I explained before. Also, one of the main reasons that we use regular expressions is for text search and text replacement operations. So this is the general syntax. You have a pattern that needs to be checked and you have a flag associated with it. So further on in the video, I'll explain to you what flags and patterns are. But before that, let me give you a small example of what a regular expression is. So I've made use of this website called regexr.com. I'll link it down in the description box below. So this is the website. Now here, let me just show you a simple regular expression. Now say we have a text that says apple. Alright, and now we have to search for the letter A. So what I do here, now this is going to be my expression. So I first provide a pattern, right? So I just say capital A. So when I say capital A, you can see that the letter A has been matched in my text. Alright, so it's as simple as that. Now one thing to remember is that here it is case sensitive. Alright, so if I say a regular small a, it does not get matched. Alright, so if I want to match AP, I can just say AP and it gets highlighted here. Alright, so this is a simple regular expression that matches with the text. So moving on, let's see what exactly these flags, patterns and quantifiers are. So what exactly is a flag? So we previously saw that the syntax consists of a pattern and then a flag, right? So these flags basically specify to alter the behavior of a regular expression. Now these flags are generally appended after the regex literal and can be specified as a second argument in your expression, right? So let's see the different flags that are supported by JavaScript. Now you have these 5 flags here. You have G, which is the global flag. Now this finds all matches instead of stopping after the first. Alright. Then you have I, which is ignore case, which makes the entire expression case insensitive. And then you have M, which is multi-line. So the caret and the dollar match the beginning and the end of each line respectively. Then you have Unicode. And if this flag is not supported, you must match specific Unicode characters. And then finally you have Y, which finds all the consecutive or adjacent matches. So moving on, we have patterns. Now these patterns are basically brackets and are used to find the range of characters. Now again we have these patterns. You have A to Z, which finds all the characters from A to Z in lower cases only. Then we have 0 to 9, which finds all the digits between 0 to 9. And finally, we have the letters of the alphabet and the digits separated by a pipe. Alright, so this basically finds any character, be it an alphabet or a digit. I hope this was clear to you. So moving on, we have quantifiers. Now these quantifiers define the number of occurrences of a particular string. Now consider n to be a string. So we have 3 quantifiers here. We have the plus, we have the asterisk, and we have the question mark. So plus indicates one or more occurrence of the character n. Alright, and the asterisk indicates 0 or more occurrences of the character n, while a question mark indicates 0 or 1 occurrence of the character n. So now that you know flags, patterns, and quantifiers, let me help you understand them better with the help of a demo. Alright, so here I have a simple text which says, "Welcome to this tutorial on JavaScript. This video teaches regular expressions." Now here, when I search for a particular word, say let me search for the word this, okay? So I say this. Now ideally, even this has to be highlighted, right? However, it does not. That is because, as mentioned earlier, it is extremely case sensitive, right? So what we can do is here we have flags. So here I say case insensitive. So once I click on that, both these words get highlighted. Alright, so this was how you make use of the I flag. Now moving on, let me help you understand patterns. Now as mentioned, you can have a range of characters. Now just in case here, say I just make it case sensitive again. And here I would like to select all the letters of the alphabet from A to Z. Alright, so when I do that, you can observe all the letters are highlighted except the ones that are in the uppercase. Correct? Because that is not mentioned here. So here when I make it insensitive, you can see all of them get highlighted. So this is how you can make use of a pattern. Now to understand quantifiers, let me use a separate text. Alright, let's have a couple of A's and a few B's. Now here when I say A, you can see all the characters A are being highlighted, right? Which is correct. But when I use the asterisk symbol here, what happens is you can observe all the 4 A's are considered to be a single unit. What asterisk does is that you can see here it says matches 0 or more of the preceding token. Now the preceding token is A and matches 0 or more occurrences of the character A. Now same, if I say B next to it, you can see all the characters B are matched, right? However, you can check the characters A in this particular text are not highlighted. I'm sure you can understand why, because the expression that I'm looking for is any occurrences of A followed by the character B. In this text here, there are no characters A and B together, correct? So here you can say that A is not highlighted. But once I give an asterisk again, what happens is that the character A gets highlighted. What happens is that B can have 0 or more occurrences. So here there is a 0 occurrence of B. So A gets highlighted. So this is how the asterisk quantifier works. Now one of the most important concepts of using regular expressions are the special characters. So here we're going to indicate the special characters with the backslash. So we have \W, for example. Now what W does is that it matches any word character, right? So all the characters here get matched. Now it also has a counter character, which is the capital W, alright? So what this does is that it does not match any word. So it matches everything that is not a word, including the periods. Now let's say we want to match all the white spaces. You can make use of the character S here. Alright, and when you have the uppercase S, it matches any character that is not a white space. Now let's say you want to match a digit. You can just have \D. So let me just type in a few digits and here you go. All of them get matched. Now let's say you want to have a range of values that get matched, right? Now let's say I want to match just 3 digits. So I can make use of curly braces and within which I can mention 3. Now here you can see that it matches 3 of the preceding token, correct? So the preceding token is basically a digit, so it groups them in 3s. So let me just add 2 other digits and there we go. Same goes with the matching of words. So here let me say W. So when I say 3, all of the characters are grouped in 3s, alright? Now let's say I want to group the words that are 3 or 4 in number. So here I can just say comma 4. Alright, now it gets matched. Alright, so now it gets grouped in 4s. So this is a simple example to show you how special characters work in a regular expression. Moving on, let's see how you can use regular expressions to search for phone numbers. Now here in my phone number, I'm going to have an area code. So let's say 080 followed by an 8-digit number. Alright, so let me give a random number. Alright, so it's 8 digits. So some people write a phone number like this, while others could write it something like this. You could have a hyphen in between and then an 8-digit number. Alright, now how are you going to look for this text? So what we're going to do is we're going to make use of the special character, that is for a digit, we make use of -d. And first we're going to look for the area code, that is a 3-digit number, right? So let me just say 3 here. And next we're going to have an optional hyphen. So for that, now since we learned a pattern can be enclosed within square brackets, so let me just say hyphen here, and let me say a question mark. Now a question mark indicates 0 or 1 occurrence of the preceding character, right? So we're going to have a hyphen for a question mark, and then finally we're going to have a digit again, and here the number of digits is 8. So let me just specify that. Alright, so when this happens, you can see both my numbers are getting highlighted. Although the text remains the same, it could be specified with different formats, right? So just like this, you can create expressions that match various formats. So this was just a simple video to acquaint you with regular expressions. We're going to be learning all about JavaScript email validation. Let's begin. So first of all, validation is an essential part when you're communicating with the user. Almost all the websites and applications that you use have forms that you need to fill in. And every time you fill a form, that information you provide needs to be validated. So this is an essential and a crucial part. Now, when you're providing more critical information like user credentials, say your ID, your password, your date of birth, all of that needs to be validated. So JavaScript enables this with the help of a feature called email validation. Now, email validation, first of all, ensures user authenticity. It also facilitates email validation on the client side so that all the processing that takes place on the server side is faster. And lastly, with JavaScript, one can validate a name, password, email, date, etc. Now, I'm sure everybody has used email IDs, right? So here's a dummy email ID for you. One thing that you must have noticed is that all IDs come with an @ symbol. Now, the first part before the @ character is the personal data. Now here it could include your name, you can provide digits, etc. So the length of this personal information can be up to 64 degrees. And following the @ character, you have the domain name. The domain name can be up to 253 characters. Talking about the personal data, now this data can include any sort of information. You can provide your name, your birth date, etc. So basically it can consist of all uppercase and lowercase letters of the alphabet. It can have digits from 0 to 9. It can include all special characters. And lastly, it could include the period character. One thing to remember is that the period character cannot occur twice and is not supposed to be either the first or the last character. Alright, so this was just a brief introduction to email validation. Now, to give you a better understanding, let's go ahead and look at a simple demo. So back in our Visual Studio Code, I've created a folder called JavaScript demo, and I've also created a file called email validation. I've also typed in the initial code. Also, if you haven't watched our videos on JavaScript regular expressions and JavaScript form validation, then I highly recommend you go through them. Email validation is basically just a combination of the two. So I'd suggest you first head back and watch those videos and come back here. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do is create a form that includes the email field, right? So for that, let's go ahead and create our form. Here I'd say form, within which I'd give input. Let the ID be text. And I'll give the placeholder property and let it be email. And the type text. Alright. And then I will break the line. And finally, I have a button. That's basically the submit button, right? So let me just say button. Type, say button, and then the message displayed is submit. Alright, So now when you're validating a form, you will have to provide certain cases, that is the if-else conditions, to validate it, correct? Now first I'm going to create a function wherein I'm going to pass the information typed in by the user as an argument, and this function consists of a regular expression against which the ID provided by the user is checked. And if the pattern matches it, then the ID is valid, and if it does not, then you'll have to alert the user. So now let's create our function. Let's say script. And now let me create a function called validate. All right. And now I'm going to create a variable called mail. And I'm going to get the information provided by using this ID from the input. Now I'm going to get the text using this ID, correct? So let me just say document.get element by ID, within which the name of the ID is text. Let me say text.value. All right. So the next thing is to create a regular expression. Now consider two different IDs here. Now the domain of the first ID ends with .com, while the next one is ending with .co.in. So when we're defining the regular expression, we'll consider all possible scenarios. So now let's head back to our VS Code. And here let me just say variable regex beginning with a /, and then you have a caret. Now the caret symbol indicates the beginning of the regular expression. Now since we can have the lower cases, upper cases, and all the digits, let's go ahead and mention them. So here, let me say A to Z, all lower cases. Then we have uppercase, and we have all digits, 0 to 9, followed by which we can also include a period and an underscore. So when you're including a period symbol, you will have to use the escape character, that is \, and then you mention the period. Now, one thing to remember is that a period symbol in regular expression means that it can include any of the characters. But here, since we're using the literal character, that is the period, we have to include \. After that, we can have an underscore as well. All right. Followed by which we have a quantifier, that is plus. Now plus here indicates one or more occurrences of all these characters. So here we include plus, after which we have a literal, that is the @ symbol, followed by which we have the domain name. So again, the domain name can include all the letters of the alphabet and the digits. So for that, let me say A to Z, and 0 to 9. Again, to remember, we have to include the plus symbol, indicating that let me just get rid of this. So we include the plus symbol to indicate one or more occurrences of these characters. Again, followed by which we have a period symbol. So for that, let's just go and type in period. Now you must be wondering why I didn't use the \. Now a \/ or an escape sequence here can only be used within the square braces. Outside of it, it is considered as a literal. So here I just mentioned the period. Again, I highly recommend you go through the JavaScript regular expressions video to clarify all your doubts. So moving on, after this, I have to mention the extension, that is .com or .co.in. Now generally these extensions are in lower cases. So for that, let's just go ahead and mention A to Z, again followed by a plus, that is a quantifier, with an optional dot again, followed by the letters A to Z. Again, these can, again I mentioned plus, followed by which I'm going to add the question mark. Now, the question mark indicates 0 or 1 occurrence of the preceding expression. So in this case, this extension, that is .in, is optional. Now the question mark here indicates either a 0 occurrence or 1 occurrence. All right. So to end the expression, you have the dollar symbol and then the front slash. I might have missed something. Okay, yeah, I haven't closed this, so let me just add the parenthesis. All right. So this is your regular expression against which we're going to be checking the email ID, right? So now we're going to use the simple if-else logic. So for that, let's say if regx dot text dot mail. Now mail is basically what has been passed by the user. All right. Now if this is true, that is, if the mail when checked against the regular expression comes in to be true, then I'm going to alert the user saying you have provided a valid email ID, and I'm going to return true. Else, if the expression does not match, then I'm going to alert the user with a message saying, sorry, incorrect email ID. And I'm going to return a false. So now you must be wondering, where is the return value going? So for that, I have to add the onClick event on my button. So here, let me say onClick. It's going to call the validate function. All right, so there we go. Let me save this and execute it. In my browser, when I type in xyz@gmail.com and when I click on submit, it alerts me saying you have provided a valid email ID. So to check the other condition as well, let's type in .co.in and submit. And again, it says that we've provided a valid email ID. Now, let's just add a period and an underscore as well. So if I say xyz dot a underscore bc@gmail.co.in, and when I submit it, it again says it's a valid email ID. For a false case, let's go ahead and remove the @ symbol and submit it. It says, sorry, incorrect email ID. Or you can also go ahead and remove the period here. And when I submit it, it still says that the ID is valid. Now here what happens is that Gmail Co is taken as one domain name with an extension .in. So here this is valid. So this was a simple video to explain email validation. I encourage you to play around with regular expressions and also consider all possible scenarios while you're validating your ID. In our previous few topics, we learned about arrays, functions, and loops. However, this time we're going to take a step forward and then learn about promises. Now you must be wondering why JavaScript promises even came into picture and what exactly these promises are. So don't worry, I've got your back. In today's video, we're going to learn about promises, why they were introduced, and also I'll explain their functionality. So let's go ahead. First up, why JavaScript promises? Now, JavaScript is predominantly single-threaded, meaning all processes contain the execution of instructions in a single sequence. So basically, in simple terms, one command is processed at a time. Now, if a function relies on the result of another function, it basically has to wait for the other function to finish and return. And until then, the current function remains idle. Now, this can be extremely frustrating because it's time-consuming and very restrictive. I mean, you're not using the system to its full capability. So to overcome these drawbacks, asynchronous concepts or asynchronous programming came into picture. So in this case, the main thread continues its execution while JavaScript allows long network requests and other tasks to happen simultaneously. Now, with the help of features like callbacks, promises, and async await, asynchronous programming can be easily achieved. I hope now you understood why promises or asynchronous programming came into picture. Moving on, what are JavaScript promises? Now, in the case of synchronous actions, you could, instead of arranging for a function to be called at some point in the future, return an object that represents this future event. This is what the standard class promise is for. Now, a promise is basically an asynchronous action that may complete at some point in the future. And when it's completed, it produces a value. Now, it is able to notify when its value is available. The easiest way to create a promise is by calling the promise.resolve method. Now, this function ensures that the value you give it is wrapped within a promise. Now, a promise basically has three states. First up is the pending state. Now, this indicates that the underlying operation has not yet been completed. Next up is the fulfill state. This indicates that the promise has been fulfilled with a particular value. Lastly, we have rejected. Now, this indicates that an error has occurred during the operation and the promise is rejected with a particular reason. Moving on, a promise is said to be settled when it is either fulfilled or rejected. Because remember, promises are immutable. They cannot change their state. So once they're either fulfilled or rejected, they're said to be settled. So when a promise is fulfilled, it has to do a particular job. So for that, we make use of the then method. Now the then method basically runs for a result, and this is used to attach a callback when the promise has been resolved. Alright, same with the case of the scenario when the promise is rejected. It makes use of a catch method, which is used to attach a callback when the promise has been rejected. Don't worry, you'll understand the concepts better when we get to the demo. So moving on, let's look at a quick flowchart to understand promises better. First up, you have a new promise. Now the promise is in the pending state. Now this promise runs for an asynchronous action. Now we check if the action is successful. If it is a yes, then we call the then method. And if it is a no, then the catch method is called. And to end it, if it is fulfilled, then the asynchronous action is performed. And if it is not, that is if it is rejected, then error handling is performed. And lastly, the values of these methods is returned to the promise. I hope this was clear. So moving ahead, let's look at the general syntax. You can use the let keyword and provide a name for your variable, and then you create a new promise. Now this promise object takes a function which in turn takes two parameters, that is resolve and reject. So to help you understand all of this better, let's go ahead and look at a simple demo. So in VS Code, I've created a folder called demo promises, within which I've created an HTML file named promises. So I have the initial code ready here. So let's begin typing our code. So let's say script. And here, as I explained, we say let, and let's give the name car to our variable. Say car, and we create a new promise. Alright, so the promise object returns a function which takes two parameters called resolve and reject. Alright, so within the function, let's define a simple use case. Now let's assume that we're checking the car for its fuel. Alright, so we'll create a variable called fuel underscore full tank. Now let's set the variable to say true. Alright, now let's set the variable to true. Now this indicates that the fuel tank is full. So now if the fuel tank is full, what I can do is I say resolve. Alright, else I reject it. Okay, I hope you understood what I'm doing here. I'm just checking for the fuel tank, and if it is full, which is true, then it gets resolved, and if it is false, then it gets rejected. So if the promise gets resolved, the then method is called, right? So let me call it here. I say car.then. Now this runs a result, right? So it's a callback function within which I say document.write the fuel tank is full, happy driving. Alright, and if it is rejected, I say .catch, which also returns a function that says document.write. Let's just display a simple message saying that the fuel tank is not empty. Alright, so let me save this and execute it. So here it displays the message, the fuel tank is full, happy driving. Now that happens because we've set the value to true here. Now in case we change it to false, let's see what it displays. Alright, it displays the message, the fuel tank is not empty. So this was a simple example showing how a promise works. Now let's go ahead and understand nested promises. So for that, let me just comment this out. And now let's create a function that returns promises. So in our case, what we're going to do is first we'll check for the fuel tank. Now in our case, we're taking a scenario where the fuel tank is empty and the engine of the car is overheating. So as a result, the car is not safe for traveling. Alright, so let's go ahead and create these functions. So I'll say let empty underscore tank, okay, which returns a promise. So within which I say return new promise, and the function takes two parameters, that is resolve and reject, within which I'm going to display a message saying resolve, which says the car doesn't have enough fuel. Alright. Now let me just copy the same piece of code to check for the engine. Alright. So let me just change the name of our variable here. Let's call it engine. And here it displays the message, the engine is overheating. Alright. And lastly, when both of these scenarios hold true, that is the car doesn't have enough fuel and the engine is overheating, we say that the car is not fit for travel. Let me just call it travel. And here I'll display a message saying the car is not safe for traveling. Alright. So right now we've created three functions that returns promises. So first we check for the empty tank, right? So let me just call the function here empty tank. And we make use of the then method, which is executed when the promise gets resolved, which takes a callback function. Alright, so basically when we check for the empty tank, after this is executed, we check for the engine, right? So here we simply call the engine function. So let me just say return engine. Alright, Now this is a nested promise in itself. So on top of it, I can run the then method again. So if the tank is empty and if the engine is overheating, then I'll just check if it is safe for traveling or not. So let me say function, and here let me just return the method travel. Alright. Now after this, if all of these are executed, then I say function. Finally, I'll display a message saying done. Alright. So let's save this file and execute it. So here I go ahead and click on promises. Let's go and check our console. And there we go. The message done is displayed. So here, since every time the promise is being resolved, a message is displayed, I can basically catch the message in a result. Okay. And this result can be passed to the coming methods. So here I just say result. I say result again. Alright. So now we get the message, the car doesn't have enough fuel. So we have to append it with the next message. So let me just say message here. I've used MSG. And let's just append it here. And the final message gets appended here with result. Okay, I have to add message here as well. Alright, so let's save it and execute the file. Alright, so here you can see the message done gets displayed first. And then, since we're appending it after the message done, it says the car doesn't have enough fuel, the engine is overheating, the car is not safe for traveling. So this was how you can make use of nested promises. We're going to learn JavaScript asynchronous concepts, that is async and await. Firstly, let's understand the basic concepts of synchronous and asynchronous programming. In case of synchronous programming, all the actions are performed sequentially. So you have the execution of the function 1, after which you have function 2, and then you have function 3. And after all of these are executed, the program terminates. Now, although synchronous programming is clean and has lesser errors, it has its own drawbacks. The entire system is halted when a particular process is being executed. Now, as a result of which, it is time consuming and the system is not used to its full capacity. So to overcome that, asynchronous programming was introduced. Now, in this case, let's assume that a particular function or a process is being executed. Now, let's consider that this particular function is waiting for a resource. Let's say a network resource. Now, instead of waiting for the function to acquire this resource, the main thread continues its execution with function 2 and function 3. And when the resource is acquired, it receives a callback, indicating that the function 1 has to be called. And finally, the entire chain is terminated. So this is how asynchronous programming works. It makes sure that the system does not halt when a particular process is waiting for a resource. This makes the entire system very efficient. Now that you know the concepts of synchronous and asynchronous programming, let's move ahead. Now, async and await are purely asynchronous programming concepts. I again suggest you check out the video on promises before watching this. Alright, so moving on. What are JavaScript async functions, that is async and await? Now, async and await are built on promises. The function is basically accompanied by the keyword async, indicating that it returns a promise. Within this function, the await keyword is applied to the promise that is being returned. And the await keyword ensures that the function waits for the promise to resolve. Now, on the surface, the execution looks synchronous while it's actually asynchronous. Now, at the place of usage of the await keyword, the execution of the function is practically blocked. Now, async functions make the code more readable and are easier to handle when compared to promises. Now to give you the general syntax, you have the async keyword associated with the function name, within which we have the await keyword with a particular promise. Now to help you understand the entire concept better, let's look at a demo. Now I've created a file called async await in my Visual Studio Code. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to have two functions that help you check for the result. Now you pass this code as a parameter to these functions, which in turn return promises telling if you have passed and will also give you the grade that you've scored. Alright, so let's go ahead and say let me call the variable result, and let's have a function which takes the score as a parameter. Alright, within which it returns a promise. So I say return new promise. Now as you know, a promise basically has a function which takes two parameters, that is resolve and reject. Now I just display a message saying calculating results. Alright, now if my score is say above 50, I resolve it by displaying a message saying congratulations, you have passed. Alright, and if it is less than 50, I reject it with a message saying you have failed. Alright, so this is a very simple promise that I've created. So moving on, let's create another function that returns a promise. So basically this function will tell you the grade that you've scored. So say let grade equals function. Now this takes response as a parameter. So let me just say response. Now again, let me just copy this. Alright, within which I'm going to console log a message saying calculating your grade. Now we're just going to resolve the promise with the message your grade is A. Alright, and then we append the response. Now the first promise either resolves saying that you've passed, or it rejects saying you failed. And in case it gets resolved, then the next promise is automatically resolved with the grade A. Alright, so moving on, let's call the functions. So here, let me first call the function result. So I say result, and let me pass the value 80 since it gets resolved. And now I make use of the .then method. Now here I catch the response. Alright, and then I just display a message indicating results received. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the response to my next function, that is the grade function. So what I say is I say return grade, and the parameter is response. So let me just pass that. Now what exactly happens is that the grade function also returns a promise. So on top of that, I can use the .then method. So I use the then method, and let me just say final grade. Now within which I just display the message final grade. Alright, now lastly we make use of the catch method. In case of errors, this catches the errors. So let me just say error, and then we'll console log it. Alright, so this is the code. Let me save this and let's execute it to see its normal execution. So this is without using async and await. Alright, so let's go ahead and execute this. So here let me check the console, and there we go. It says calculating results, results received, calculating your grade is A, and congratulations, you have passed. So this was basically without using async and await. So now let me show you how you can use async and await and how easier the code becomes. Alright, so what we can do is, let me just comment this out. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call my function, right? So I'm just going to make use of the async keyword while calling it. So I say async function, and let me call the function calculate results. Okay, so now inside this method I'm going to call the functions result and grade. So when I first call result, the value that is returned by result is going to be stored in the variable response. So for that, let me just say const response. Now I make use of the await keyword here. I say await result of 20, or in our case, let me just say 80. Alright. So what the await keyword does is that the function result ceases to execute until the promise is resolved, and whatever the promise returns gets stored in the variable response. Alright. So now after this, let me just display a message that says results received. Alright. Now next I'm going to call the other function, that is grade. So again I'm going to say constant, and I'm going to have to create another variable. Let me call it final grade, and it's the same procedure. I use the await keyword and call the function grade, and I pass response as the argument. Alright, and after this I'm going to say console log for final grade. So it's as simple as that. So first we call the result function, which returns a promise which gets stored in the variable response. Alright, then we're going to call the grade function and pass the response as an argument, and the result of which is being stored in final grade. Alright, and lastly we display final grade. So now you must be wondering, if this executes, what about errors? What if the value that I pass is less than 50, right? For that I'm going to have to catch an error. So what I can do is that I can place this entire code within the try block. Alright, so let me just say try, and now what I can do is I can catch. Now if there is an error, it gets caught and then I display it. So let me say console log error. Alright, and lastly let's call the function calculate results. Okay, so let me save this and execute it. So alright, here we go. It displays the same messages in the same sequence that we saw before. So now to give you an example of rejection, so here let me just pass 20. Alright, let's save it, and there we go. It says calculating results, you have failed. So you can make use of async and await instead of complicating the entire piece of code by using promises. So with that, we come to the end of this crash course video. If you found it helpful, then make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any queries, let us know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching.